Thank you, Jill. I'd like to begin by thanking Sam Adams and Jill Greenwood for inviting me and for making this talk happen, and above all, for the impeccable organization. The Allen has often inspired my teaching and my published research. I have curated or co-curated 3 teaching exhibitions. I always bring my students to the museum on the very first day of class. And I have also used artworks from the Allen's collection in my publications. For example, my article on the Russian Grand Tour to Italy featured 7 artworks from the Allen, with permission, of course. And my book, Elena Ferrante as World Literature, referenced several prints from the Allen's collection. Of course, the current exhibition, Feminisms, Feminine Faces in Intimate Spaces, supplied the intellectual impetus for this talk. Let me open then with this photo collage by Kun Young Park, which is part of the exhibition. And let's read carefully the extended label accompanying it. This image is the first in a series Park made by ripping a self-portrait into hundreds of minuscule pieces and then gluing them to a support. As with similar works featuring disembodied hands and heads, Park left enough space between the tesserae to accentuate the fibers around the torn edges of each piece. She comments, "I attempt to capture the tremor of unstable presence." Her method highlights the fragility of human bodies as her spectral image simultaneously seems to disintegrate and reconstitute itself. This text, which aptly describes Park's creative method and artistic vision, a poetics of fracture and fragmentation, followed by reconstitution and reinvention, applies uncannily to what women do with photographs in Elena Ferrante's novels and how they relate to their bodies. We can trace a transmedial and transnational conversation between Park and Ferrante, or what feminist scholar Susan Stanford Friedman has called a radical juxtaposition of texts, a conceptual methodological collage of their works and their techniques. In Friedman's definition, collage as a comparative method borrows from early 20th century modernist poetics and fosters identification of new generalities based on what texts share. Put side by side, each in its own distinctive context, but bred together, texts and collage produce new insights about each as well as new theoretical frameworks. I'm proposing a collage of Park's and Ferrante's creations, focusing on what Ferrante's novels reveal about photographs and photo collages manipulated by creative women through shredding, ripping, and reassembling the fragments into new visions of themselves. Within the world of her novels, Ferrante employs a vocabulary of photography and collage, both as narrative strategies and as plot events to center women's bodies and subjectivities. Her texts use fragmentation and cutting to capture women's liminal experience, to depict the physical and symbolic violence women are subjected to within an oppressive patriarchal system that silences them and erases their identities. Ferrante deploys visual tropes to depict female bodies whose boundaries dissolve into blurry edges, but whose fragments are eventually reassembled and reconstituted to generate artistic female genealogies. Mothers, daughters, female friends who, like Park, alter, cut, or shred their own photographic portraits. But before we delve into Ferrante's texts, let us briefly consider Ferrante's own identity. Who is Elena Ferrante? Elena Ferrante is perhaps the most enigmatic, most widely read, and most reviewed author in translation in the United States today. Elena Ferrante is also the pen name, gendered female, of a contemporary Italian writer whose biographical identity remains unknown. But we do know that her novel, My Brilliant Friend, was selected by the New York Times as the #1 book of the century. We also know that she's the author of 3 short novels, a children's book, the 4 books comprising the Neapolitan novels, another novel, and 4 volumes of nonfiction, autobiographical writing, interviews, essays, and correspondence. Ferrante's artistic project is a performance of feminine authorship as in a practical rebellion against a global patriarchal system which dictates notions and representations of femininity, motherhood, authorship, and creativity. It is significant that Ferrante, whatever her real gender, adopts the pen name of a woman, electing a feminine identity despite all the obstacles this choice implies. More specifically, Ferrante's erasure of her biographical identity is an act of resistance to the status and image-obsessed Italian media, to a culture where the value of a literary text is judged not by its quality, but by the author's existing reputation or appearance. To resist the vicious cycle of selling her image along with her texts, Ferrante does not merely remove herself from it, remaining distant and uninvolved. By insisting on her absence and taking on a pseudonym, she creates the author, Elena Ferrante. This act of invention or self-invention exposes the mechanisms of commodification and consumerism underlying not only the Italian, but also the global literary market. Ferrante, in other words, invents the author, Elena Ferrante, on her own terms, constructing an image of her own choice and design. She erases the biographical author and presents this self-erasure as a form of reclaiming the self and her authorial power. Her performance of authorship, her self-portrait, if you will, captures the poetics of self-erasure and self-reconstitution that we see in Park. Elena Ferrante is conscious of working at once within and against a male-dominated Western artistic tradition. The woman artist or writer must struggle against the tradition which not only excludes her, but also defines and represents her. In her essays, Ferrante calls for a female artistic genealogy that reclaims the representation of women's bodies and experience. And this is exactly what she depicts in her literary works through the processes of fragmentation, disintegration, assemblage, and reconstitution. Let me now focus on 3 case studies where Ferrante uses cutting, cropping, and photographic collage, namely her 2 early novels, Troubling Love from 1992 and The Days of Abandonment from 2002, and Volume 2 of the Neapolitan novels, The Story of a New Name. Beginning with Troubling Love. Troubling Love traces a daughter's search for the truth about her mother's unexpected death. Delia, the first-person narrator, returns to Naples after her mother, Amalia, has been found drowned and begins to investigate. In tracing the story of her mother's demise, Delia gradually unearths repressed memories of the abuse both she and her mother suffered at the hands of violent men. Memories of bleeding body parts, molestation, and harassment pervade the narrative. The female body as parts, literally or symbolically mutilated, comprises a key image in this novel, which is also a novel about artists and artistic legacies. Delia is a comic artist. Her father is a mediocre painter of erotic scenes and gaudy landscapes, and her mother is an artist who works with fabric. As a seamstress, she invents and reinvents bodies and clothes. And importantly for my argument, the novel is framed by several artworks, an oil painting and 2 photographs that appear at the beginning and at the close of the narrative. An oil painting, a masterful portrait of 2 women, opens Delia's investigation of her mother's past and sets into motion the events in the present. Tracking down an expensive bra Amalia was wearing when she died, Delia visits the Vossi lingerie shop and remembers seeing the painting in the window. And I'm reading the quote on the screen, the one on the left. I especially like the corner window where women's garments were carelessly placed beneath a painting that I wasn't able to date, but that was certainly by a skilled artist. 2 women so close and so identical in movement that their profiles were almost superimposed, were running open-mouthed from the right side of the canvas to the left. You couldn't tell if they were following or being followed. The image seemed to have been cut away from a much larger scene, and so only the left legs of the women were visible, and their extended arms were severed at the wrists. Renowned art historian Linda Nochlin, who actually gave a talk here at the Allen in the fall of 2013, which was my first semester at Oberlin, so I had the honor and privilege to meet her. But in any case, Linda Nochlin has argued that the body in parts belongs to the visual representation of modernity and the modern experience. Pervade through signboards, paintings, and photographs, the fragmented or cut off female body metonymically evokes the body as whole, referencing the sexual attractiveness of the invisible owner or the availability of appetizing female bodies beyond the boundaries of visual representation. Notably, in Ferrante's novel, the painting is exhibited in a lingerie shop window with scattered underwear metonymically standing for the female body and for an eroticized, sexualized female body. As a fragment cut off from a larger work, the canvas itself emblematizes violence. The two women's bodies caught in the act of fleeing, their legs missing, and their hands truncated at the wrists are likewise disfigured. This image recalls the intentional cropping of female figures we find in the work of European male artists since the late 19th century. This pictorial strategy alludes to women as objects or fetishizes their body parts for their erotic potential, as Linda Nochlin has argued again. In Ferrante's text, the canvas embodies the representational violence of dismembering the female body in an androcentric artistic tradition. It captures the double violence inflicted on Amalia and Delia by several generations of men in troubling love. Sexual abuse and exploitation on the one hand, and importantly, Amalia's non-consensual posing nude for her husband's erotic paintings on the other. At the end of the novel, Delia encounters the Vossi painting again, this time in her father's studio, propped up next to his vulgar portraits of the nude Amalia. But this time Ferrante presents a somewhat different picture. And this is the quote on the right. While he spoke, I saw obliquely under the window the painting that I had admired as a girl in the window of the Vossi sisters' shop. The two shouting women whose profiles almost coincided, hurled from right to left in a mutilated movement of hands, feet, parts of the head, as if the canvas had been unable to contain them or had been bluntly sawed off. The women's open mouths are now described as screaming, so they have a voice now. Their movement a union of body parts. But in this second appearance, the truncated bodies exceed the boundaries of the panel, liberated rhetorically by linguistic figure as if the two women exit the prison of the frame, the movement of their mutilated limbs now evoking rage, energy, and action. The oil painting that opens and closes Troubling Love points to the processes of visual, literal, or metaphorical erasure, fragmentation, and objectification that define women's experience in the novel. I'm reminded here of several works in the Allen's collection by women artists who expose and playfully subvert venerable traditions and iconic representations of the female body. And these are the artworks I have in mind that play with longstanding traditions and iconic representations of the female body: Renée Stout, Louise Bourgeois, Audrey Fleck, and of course, Kun Young Park. And incidentally, upstairs in the exhibition Feminisms, Kun Young Park's self-portrait is placed right next to Renée Stout's portrait, self-portrait. But there's another subversion at work in this novel. And this time it has to do with photography as a means of self-erasure. I already mentioned that Delia returns to Naples to reconstruct her mother's last days. Delia has repressed all the traumatic events of her past and rejected her mother as a reminder of that violent past, attempting to erase from herself any similarity to Amalia. And yet, Delia uncannily resembles her mother, so they're like doubles, almost like doubles, physically. In fact, Amalia has modified her photographic portrait on her ID card to show this resemblance, except Delia does not know it and is shocked by the discovery of her mother's photo ID. This is what Delia writes. I looked at the photograph of my mother. The long, baroquely sculpted hair on her forehead and around her face had been carefully scraped away. The white that emerged around her head had been changed with a pencil to a nebulous gray. With the same pencil, someone had slightly hardened the features on her face. The woman in the photograph wasn't Amalia, it was me. The mother's face has been altered, erased, to inscribe the daughter's features onto it. The photograph constitutes a double portrait of Amalia Delia, a superimposition of faces like the two women's profiles in the painting, enabled through the erasure of official documented identity on the official ID card. The novel concludes with Delia's act of artistic creation, which appropriates the visual rhetoric of the Vossi painting and reinvents it to tell another story. Delia uses a pen to draw over her photograph and to transform it into a portrait of Amalia. The text ends with the superimposed coinciding faces and stories of Amalia Delia, a double self-portrait and the product of Delia's own hand. And this is the quote on the right. I stared for a long time at the photograph, studying myself in search of Amalia in that image. It was a recent photo, taken when I renewed the document. With a pen, as the sun burned my neck, I drew around my own features my mother's hair. I looked at myself, smiled at myself. That old-fashioned hairstyle, popular in the 40s but already rare at the end of the 50s, suited me. Amalia had been. I was Amalia. The shared strategies of self-erasure, alteration, and reinvention link the two photographs and the two women who reclaim their identities and their self-representation. The resulting bond between Amalia and Delia excludes the male artist, the father, or any male figure, in fact, and instead visualizes a relationship between mother and daughter, not contingent on an androcentric and patrilineal tradition, not even on a biological kinship, but rather on shared artistic skill and creative technique. Ferrante's themes of cropping, cutting, superimposing, or fragmenting images take the form of a photographic collage in her second novel, The Days of Abandonment. The narrator, Olga, recounts that her husband has left her and their two children with no explanation. Olga, an exemplary mother and housewife, has devoted her life to her husband's career and his professional success. She has sacrificed her time, her body, her talent as a writer to take care of Mario and the children. The perfectly maintained order of her domestic reality, however, collapses when Mario leaves and Olga's identity likewise unravels. Her narration reflects her disorientation and the stages of denial, rage, grief, and gradual recovery she goes through to find a new sense of self outside the patriarchal frame. Notably, she confronts her loss of identity through an artistic collage that involves cutting and pasting, and she cuts and pastes family photographs. She first envisions the act of cutting herself to pieces as self-exploration, as auto-psychoanalysis, or even as a kind of scriptotherapy. And this is what she says. I wanted to cut myself to pieces. I wanted to study myself with precision and cruelty, recount the evil of these terrible months. So right after she states that, she looks at family photo albums, examining the faces and bodies of her children, seeking physical traces of Mario, her husband, in them. Then Olga wields the scissors to create a photographic collage. And this is the quote. I took a pair of scissors and, for a long silent evening, cut out eyes, ears, legs, noses, hands of mine, of the children of Mario. I pasted them onto a piece of drawing paper. The result was a single body of monstrous, futurist indecipherability. Olga's art making becomes an epistemological mode of seeing as knowing. Only by cutting up body parts and then piecing them together can she interrogate the illusory wholeness of her family, her seemingly perfect motherhood, and her shattered identity. Ferrante's use of such visual strategies recalls another work from the Allens collection. In her photographic collage, Portrait of Mother, Son, and Daughter from 1989, the American artist Cindy Sherman captures the mother as a monstrous assemblage of her own and her children's body parts. A kneeling woman, her eyes closed and her face with a rapturous expression, is embracing her two children. The children's figures eerily blend into hers, and their heads disappear behind her head, so that the mother appears to be a one-headed creature with 3 bodies and 4 visible legs. The mother's body loses its discrete boundaries to portray motherhood as the loss of agency and corporeal autonomy. Juxtaposing Sherman's and Ferrante's portrayals of motherhood shed lights on Olga's artistic endeavor to both represent and comprehend her own role as mother and wife. The ultimate reclaiming of female agency and artistic power occurs in the Neapolitan novels, where the protagonist Lila, like Delia and Olga, disfigures her own portrait to regain creative autonomy through self-effacement and self-fragmentation. The Neapolitan novels tell the story of 2 friends, Elena and Lila, over the course of 60 years as they grow up in a working-class Neapolitan neighborhood, and as their paths diverge when Elena goes to high school, then university, marries into an illustrious family of intellectuals and becomes a writer, while Lila drops out after elementary school, gets married at 16, and remains in their neighborhood. The first volume, My Brilliant Friend, opens with Lila's disappearance in a prologue entitled, and notice the title, Erasing All Traces. At the age of 66, Lila has indeed vanished, erasing all traces of her existence. She has even cut out her face from all family photographs, so you can trace a motif now. Elena, the first-person narrator, then sets out to tell Lila's story, to reconstitute those photographs, in a sense. The image of Lila's face cut out of all photographs recalls the truncated image on the Vossi painting in Troubling Love. The language of cutting links the 2 texts so that Lila's act of self-cancellation can be read in the context of what visual art reveals in the earlier novel. Extraordinarily intelligent and beautiful, Lila is subjected to men's objectifying and possessive gaze, reduced to a body on the marriage market by her family, and then exploited in various ways by her husband, her relatives, and the mafia family, Solara. In the second volume, The Story of a New Name, Lila uses photography to reclaim her body through self-effacement and self-fragmentation. She eliminates her body from her official wedding photograph and manipulates the image to gain control over her visual representation. After her husband and his mafioso friend Solara decide to use her photograph, the wedding photograph, as advertisement for their shoe shop, Lila modifies the image to her liking. She covers the white of her wedding dress with funereal black. And this is the top quote. She spied a roll of black paper and she took a pair of big scissors. She cut strips of black paper and pinned them here and there to the photograph. The resulting artwork repeats, but with a difference, the pictorial rhetoric of the Vossi painting in Troubling Love, with its missing, cut off body parts. And this is the second quote. The body of the bride Lila appeared cruelly shredded. Much of the head had disappeared, as had the stomach. There remained an eye, the hand on which the chin rested, the brilliant stain of her mouth, the diagonal stripe of the bust, the line of the crossed legs, the shoes. The self-fragmentation and self-erasure depicted here reinvent the narrative of the Vossi painting as one of feminine authorial intent. Lila repossesses her own body and controls its representation and display. In this way, she also destroys the wedding dress and what it represents to her, marital abuse, subjugation, and the lurid male gaze. So she effectively eliminates or eradicates the male gaze as well. Or we might even say fragments the male gaze. Importantly, and here lies Ferrante's genius, I think, the process of self-erasure becomes one of creative euphoria, artistic freedom, and female bonding. Elena takes part in making this photo collage. And here's how she describes the shared ecstasy of art making. There were magnificent hours of play, of invention, of freedom. With extreme precision, she was demanding, we attached the black paper cutouts. We traced red or blue borders between the remains of the photograph and the dark clouds that were devouring it. We forgot about Antonio, Nino, Stefano, the Solares. We suspended time. We isolated space. There remained only the play of glue, scissors, paper, paint, the play of shared creation. Covering the photograph with tape and erasing the traces of Lila's body becomes a liberating experience outside conventional time and space. Men do not exist within this place of collaborative, feminine, artistic creation. Women wield the tools, paper and paint, of visual representation. The wedding photograph, a sign of Lila's confinement within her marriage and within a male-dominated visual and social order, is converted into an abstract modernist collage. The scene of Lila and Elena's collaborative erasure of Lila's body in her wedding photograph marks the beginning of Lila's attempts to erase her existence as a form of resistance to the patriarchal frame. And this is the last quote here, with the black paper, with the green and purple circles that Lila drew around certain parts of her body, with the blood-red lines with which she sliced and said she was slicing it, she completed her own self-destruction in an image. To destroy her image is to delete and hence liberate herself from the system which contains and controls her. Photography gives her the creative license to annul herself figuratively through the manipulation of visual representation. Okay, and to conclude, last slide. So to conclude, I want to return to the juxtaposition of Ferrantes and Park's works. In My Brilliant Friend, Lila uses a word, smarginatura, to describe her episodes of dissolving boundaries when, triggered by male abuse, she perceives the horror of human bodies turned inside out, unstable, leaking and oozing, permeable and open to invasions from the outside. Post-traumatic responses to violence, these panic attacks or episodes are crises of identity that capture women's liminal, marginalized, and fractured existence. The Italian word smarginatura, which Ferrantes translator Anne Goldstein translates as dissolving margins or dissolving boundaries, originates in the language of typography, so visual art, if you will. But Lila hijacks its original meaning, and the original meaning is to cut off the edges of a page. And Lila resignifies it as describing the female condition. The superimposition of meanings, the process of cutting off the edges of a page, and the dissolution of the self, dissolving margins, dissolving boundaries, that converge, these two meanings that converge in the term smarginatura, is what links Ferrantes and Park's works. And we can even say that Kunhyun Park's method, her creative strategy, is a kind of visual smarginatura. If we revisit the extended label with its salient points, we can say that Park's portrayal of the tremor of unstable presence, through shredding the self-portrait and then reassembling the torn pieces to reconstitute the fragmented self, aligns with Ferrantes' literary use of photography, collage, and fragmentation to center the woman artist and reassemble the female body. I might even suggest that the transnational, transmedial collage of Ferrante and Park has generated new insights and new interpretive frameworks, as well as a new transcultural genealogy of creative women. Thank you.